My name's Emily Parker, and I'm 45 years old. Most of my adult life was spent wearing the rank of lieutenant colonel in the United States Army. I've walked through war zones, said goodbye to friends I considered family, and carried secrets that will follow me to the grave. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for this. In a packed courtroom, my own brother stood, pointed straight at me, and shouted, "She's nothing but a fake veteran." The words cracked through the air like gunfire, lodging deep in my chest. The room went still, the kind of silence that feels loud. I could hear the sharp inhale of strangers, feel the sting of their judgment, see the way every eye locked onto me as if decades of service and sacrifice could vanish in an instant. I didn't break. I didn't shed a tear. Instead, I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a thin beige folder I'd been holding onto for nearly 2 years. My fingers stayed steady. I rose from my seat, walked to the bench, and set it gently in front of the judge. He opened to the first page, and the world seemed to pause. His expression hardened, his tone dropped to barely above a whisper, yet every word hit me like it was blasted through a loudspeaker. "No one moves. Lock the doors now." Within seconds, military police in pressed uniforms and heavy boots filled the room. My brother's attorney, the same man who had been smirking at me just moments before, lost his grip on every paper he was holding. His face turned the color of chalk. Ryan, my brother, stumbled backward. My mother's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The entire row of my family looked pale, trapped, and exposed. Right then, I wasn't the disgrace they'd painted me to be. I wasn't the family's black sheep. I was the woman who had come back, not for validation, not for pity, but to tear apart the web of lies they'd been spinning for years. Deep down, I knew this was only the opening chapter. I never pictured my life winding up here. Before the legal battles, before the betrayal, before the cold walls of a courtroom, there was just me, the ocean, and an old house clinging to the cliffs. My dad left it to me, a weather-beaten place overlooking the waters of Carmel Bay. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. I still remember the crash of the waves against the rocks, the tang of salt in the air, and my father's voice before my first deployment. "Some things, Em, you protect no matter what it costs you." I carried those words like armor. For 2 decades, I served overseas, watching the world break apart and piecing myself back together with scraps of borrowed courage. When I finally came home, I didn't expect parades or medals. I didn't even want thanks. I just wanted something simple, to belong again. But home wasn't what it used to be. My father was gone. The man who had held our family together left behind a straightforward will, dividing his modest estate among his 3 kids. I got the house I loved. Ryan, my older brother, took over the family business. Tyler, the youngest, stayed quiet, always watching more than speaking. For a few short weeks, I thought maybe we could make it work. Then the envelope arrived, a thick packet of legal papers that carried the kind of betrayal you can't prepare for. Sitting in my kitchen, my hands resting on the cold granite counter, I read every line. Ryan and my own mother, my blood, were accusing me of fraud. They claimed I had never truly served, that I'd forged my military record to get a better share in Dad's will. Worse, they accused me of conning the government, stealing benefits meant for real veterans. 20 years of service. Shrapnel still lodged in my shoulder. Sleepless nights haunted by explosions. But none of it mattered to them. The court summons gave me 30 days to appear. I remember looking across the table at Tyler. His eyes stayed down, the way they usually did. The peacemaker. The quiet one. But there was something in his gaze, hesitation, sadness, maybe guilt. He said nothing, and I understood then I'd be walking into this fight alone. The weeks blurred together, long days of gathering every scrap of proof I had, official records, medals, photographs. But the hardest preparation wasn't for the evidence, it was for the reality that my family had chosen greed over blood. I had fought for my country. Now I was fighting for my name. The courtroom wasn't cold in temperature, it was cold in spirit. The air felt thin, the fluorescent lights too harsh, every face watching too closely. I sat tall in a dark navy suit. No uniform. No ribbons. Just Emily Parker, the woman they were trying to destroy. Ryan sat to my right. My mother gripped his arm, her face carved from stone. Tyler was on the far edge, looking down, barely moving. Then it happened. Ryan rose, and with venom I didn't recognize in his voice, he delivered the line that would brand itself into my memory forever. "She's nothing but a fake veteran." Gasps filled the air. Heads turned. I stayed still. My hands didn't shake. I knew there was no going back. The judge asked for evidence. Ryan's lawyer laid out a pile of doctored records, warped timelines, and outright fabrications. Every word out of his mouth, every calculated glance, was aimed at tearing me apart, not just in the eyes of the law, but as a person. They wanted to erase me entirely. When my turn came, I didn't start talking. Not yet. Instead, I reached for the file. Tyler had slipped it into my hands just a few days earlier, without a word. Inside was every piece of proof they were certain I'd never find. I stepped forward, placed it on the judge's bench, and waited. What followed would change the course of everything. But in that moment, I was simply a soldier again, steady, calm, unshaken. The truth is, I was never the daughter they hoped for. From my earliest memories, I knew I was different, not rebellious, not loud, just out of step with their world. While Ryan, my older brother, was shaped to inherit the family empire, and Tyler, the youngest, was wrapped in layers of gentle protection, I drifted somewhere in between, restless, unseen. My parents built their lives around Parker and Sons Properties, a chain of upscale coastal hotels that defined not just our wealth, but our family's entire identity. Every dinner, every holiday, every decision circled back to the business. Even as a kid, I could feel the current running beneath it all. Loyalty to the family meant loyalty to the company. But I didn't fit that mold. I didn't care about occupancy rates or revenue forecasts. I cared about stories of courage and justice, about freedom, things I found in worn library books while they memorized financial reports. I remember being about 11 when my dad found me reading a biography of Harriet Tubman. He sat down next to me, smiled, and said, "One day you'll find something worth fighting for." My mother, on the other hand, never smiled at moments like that. She looked at me like I was an unfinished puzzle she couldn't figure out. Ryan thrived in their spotlight. He learned young how to charm them, how to mirror their ambitions. I stood off to the side, watching him turn into their golden child, always right, always praised. Tyler was different. Gentle. Quiet. He spent most of his time tucked into corners with his books, like I did, but unlike me, he never pushed back. I tried to shield him when I could, covering for missed practices, forgotten homework. I recognized that softness in him because it was the same part of myself I'd had to hide to survive under that roof. Still, no matter the moments of connection Tyler and I shared, love in our family was conditional. And the condition was obedience. When I told them I was joining the army, it wasn't a discussion, it was a full-scale fight. My mother cried. Ryan scoffed. Even Tyler avoided my eyes. But I left anyway. At 18, with nothing more than a duffel bag and my father's last words echoing in my mind, I walked out. None of them followed. War changes you. Anyone who says otherwise hasn't truly been there. I spent the next 22 years wearing the uniform, stationed in places most people can't even find on a map. I became an officer. I led soldiers into missions where we all knew there was a chance we wouldn't make it back. And sometimes, we didn't. My first deployment to Afghanistan was the first time I ever felt fully alive. The searing desert heat, the weight of body armor, the constant thrum of helicopters, it all carved something fierce and unshakable inside me. For once, I wasn't the daughter who didn't belong. I was Lieutenant Parker. I mattered. But with that purpose came loss. I remember every face I couldn't bring home, every letter I wrote to families who would never see their loved ones again. The explosion that ripped through my convoy left shrapnel in my shoulder and nerve damage that still reminds me it's there. The nightmares never asked permission before returning. Honor and duty carried me through those years, but they left their marks, some you could see, most you couldn't. Still, I never regretted a moment, because I knew exactly who I was in that uniform. I earned every medal, every salute, every fold of the flag I placed into the hands of grieving parents. When I finally came home, older, quieter, with a different kind of steel in my spine, I didn't expect my family to understand. But I thought maybe they'd at least respect it. They didn't. Ryan would change the subject any time my service came up. My mother would avert her eyes. Tyler stayed silent. It became painfully clear my years in uniform weren't seen as a badge of honor, they were an inconvenient detour from the life they'd scripted for me. Still, I carried no regrets. The army had taught me something that would one day save me, that battles aren't always fought with rifles, but with resilience. And that survival is its own form of victory. When my dad passed, some things shifted while others stayed exactly the same. He went quietly in his sleep, in the very house I would one day fight to keep. There was no drama, no cinematic farewell, just absence. The funeral was pristine, carefully managed. People in dark suits offered soft condolences. From the outside, we looked like a whole family. I stood between Ryan and Tyler as the casket was lowered into the ground. And I swear, I could almost hear my father's voice again. Some things, you have to protect. The reading of the will happened a little over 2 weeks after the funeral. I wasn't expecting much. I'd been the soldier who disappeared from their lives, the daughter they never quite understood. But when the lawyer announced my father had left me the Carmel Bay house, our oldest family property, the air in the room seemed to thicken. Ryan's jaw clenched. My mother's lips tightened into a hard, pale line. Tyler, as usual, stayed silent, though I caught the flicker in his widened eyes, shifting between the three of us. The place wasn't worth millions, but it carried more value than money. It was history, memory, and roots. Ryan got the business, just as everyone assumed. Tyler was given a trust fund. I was left with a home. And for a fleeting moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, we could move forward. But greed has deep roots. Less than a month later, the first notice landed in my mailbox. They accused me of manipulating my father, fabricating my service record, stealing valor, and tainting the will. They demanded not just the house, but the inheritance, and my silence. I wasn't shocked they wanted more. I'd always known Ryan's appetite for control. What stunned me was how far they'd go, willing to erase everything I'd ever been to take it. The betrayal wasn't in the legal paperwork, it was in the faces of people who should have stood beside me, yet chose to bury me instead. That was the moment I knew the real war had only just begun. When the lawsuit became public, my world flipped overnight. It started as whispers. Then the headlines hit, blogs, gossip sites, even local news. Decorated veteran or master fraud. The Emily Parker scandal. I remember staring at my photo plastered online, the word fraud stamped beneath it in bold letters. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Reporters. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Old college acquaintances. Some demanded answers, others drifted away without a word. I became a ghost in my own hometown. The cafe where I used to grab my morning coffee, the barista wouldn't even meet my eyes. Neighbors I'd known for decades crossed the street to avoid me. I could see it in their faces, doubt, suspicion, judgment. The worst wounds didn't come from strangers, though, they came from the people I once called friends. A few sent short, polite messages, thinking of you, but most simply vanished. Invitations stopped coming. Smiles turned to awkward nods. Even my Veterans Association hesitated to reach out, eventually contacting me only to clarify my status. The isolation was heavier than anything I'd endured in a combat zone. Meanwhile, Ryan and my mother pushed forward relentlessly. Their lawyers were ruthless, feeding the press, leaking falsified documents, spinning half-truths into something damning. They didn't just call me a fraud, they painted me as an ungrateful daughter and a disgrace to both family and country. Every time I saw my mother on TV, calmly claiming she was concerned for my well-being, I felt that same sick churn in my stomach. How effortlessly she smiled for the cameras while driving the knife deeper. And Tyler, he stayed silent. Or at least, I thought he did. The hardest part wasn't the legal fight itself. It was the creeping fear that maybe people would believe them, that my years in uniform, my scars, my sacrifices, all of it could be erased if the world decided to tell a different story. I started to doubt myself. I felt unmoored. Nights blurred with cold sweats, my war nightmares bleeding into this new kind of battlefield. But in that darkness, something inside me hardened. I wasn't going to let them win. Not like this. This wasn't a fight for emotions, it was a fight for truth. And the truth was buried under years of family secrets and carefully built lies. The first crack in their armor came unexpectedly, a text from Tyler. Just 5 words, "We need to talk alone." We met one windy night on the cliffs where Dad used to take us as kids. The ocean thundered below, the air sharp with salt. Tyler stood there with his arms crossed, his expression tense. He looked older than I remembered, more lines on his face, but his eyes were still the same. Soft. Troubled. distant. "I never wanted this," he said, voice low. "I didn't know how far they'd go." He pulled a small flash drive from his pocket and handed it to me. No explanations. No promises. Just, "I thought you should see this." Back home, my hands shook as I plugged it into my laptop. What appeared on the screen knocked the air out of me. Emails between Ryan and my mother, sent months before our father died, discussing ways to alter the will. Financial records showing large transfers to offshore accounts. Money funneled through veterans' charities I'd never even heard Ryan mention. They had used my name, my service, my image to build a fake paper trail, profiting from it, while setting me up as the scapegoat. There were even drafts of press statements accusing me of stolen valor, dated months before I knew there was any issue. I sat frozen, the weight of the betrayal pressing down on me. But the sharpest cut wasn't in the scheme itself, it was in Tyler. The boy I'd once protected. The brother I thought I'd lost to the family's machinery. Tyler had finally, painfully, chosen to do the right thing. And that left me with my own choice to make. I could use the evidence he'd given me to burn them to the ground, or I could find a way to win without becoming what they were. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I mapped out my plan, slow and deliberate, letting every ounce of heartbreak harden into determination. They thought they had me figured out. They thought I'd crumble. But they'd forgotten one thing: soldiers don't quit. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror for a long time. The woman staring back wasn't the 18-year-old who had left for basic training. She wasn't the officer who'd survived roadside bombs and ambushes in the desert. She wasn't even the young woman who'd cried the day she received her first commendation. What I saw was something steadier, sharper: Emily Parker, the woman who refused to be erased. I gathered everything: Tyler's files, my own service records, sworn statements from former commanders, letters from soldiers I had led, photographs, medals, every piece of my real story. But I also carried something else: perspective. I realized my fight wasn't only about the Carmel Bay house, or the inheritance, or even my name. It was about something bigger: dignity, truth, and the quiet defiance of standing firm when the world tries to push you into silence. I could have gone public. I could have shouted my side from every rooftop. But instead, I chose precision. I chose the law. I chose integrity. I hired the sharpest forensic accountants, the smartest legal strategists, and a team of digital investigators. Every move was intentional, not to humiliate them, but to reveal them. And through it all, Tyler stayed by my side. He still fumbled over words and avoided my eyes when emotions ran too high, but he stayed. And that mattered. The day before the final hearing, I went back to the Carmel Bay house. I walked through every room, tracing my fingers along the walls, hearing my father's laughter echo in my memory. I sat on the porch as the sun dipped toward the horizon, the sea breeze cool against my skin. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I was ready. They had declared war on my character, my memories, and everything I held sacred. But I was done playing by their rules. This time, I'd let the truth speak, and I wouldn't flinch. The courtroom felt colder than usual that morning. Not from the air conditioning or the marble floors, but from the weight pressing into my chest. Silence pooled in the room, thick and tense enough to cut. I sat straight-backed at my table, hands flat, eyes forward. Paper rustled softly. Someone coughed. Whispers drifted in from the benches, but I tuned them out. Ryan sat across from me, his lawyer on one side, my mother on the other. They looked calm, polished, even, but I saw the cracks. Ryan's jaw tightened. His fingers tapped a restless rhythm on the table. My mother stared above the judge's head, avoiding my eyes completely. Tyler sat behind them, one row back. Hands folded. Gaze fixed on the floor. No words. No glances. No signal of where his loyalty lay. For a moment, the old ache returned. The memory of the little boy who'd trail me through the garden, tug on my sleeve when voices got too loud, whisper that he wished he could be brave like me. I wondered if that boy was still in there somewhere, or if decades of control had buried him for good. The judge called us to order. Attorneys stood. The performance began. Ryan's lawyer was slick, each sentence polished like a sales pitch. He spoke of family values, concerns for rightful inheritance, and irregularities in my military record. He rolled out charts, timelines, and printouts, every one of them crafted to chip away at my credibility and seed doubt in the judge's mind. I didn't blink. I'd anticipated each move months ago, back when the first legal notice arrived. My attorney rose, calm, precise. She dismantled their arguments piece by piece, never once raising her voice. She presented my verified, notarized service record. She read out commendations, shared letters from commanders, and showed photos from deployments. I had never intended to use those things as weapons. But now, they were my armor. Hours dragged by. The air felt thinner. Then Ryan took the stand. I sat perfectly still as he raised his hand, swore his oath, and met the judge's gaze with the same charm he'd used to sway investors for years. He spoke of family loyalty, of my strange behavior, of how I distanced myself for decades, only to reappear at the reading of the will. He painted me as unstable, opportunistic, a woman who had worn the uniform, but never truly earned it. And then he said it, the words that made my blood go cold. She's just a fake veteran. It wasn't loud, but the ripple that moved through the courtroom was unmistakable. I kept my eyes locked on him, steady, unblinking, but something deep inside me splintered. My mother took the stand next. Her tone was cool, deliberate. She spoke softly, almost regretfully, about her concerns over my mental stability, about supposed fabrications, about her fear that the inheritance had been unfairly influenced. I sat silent, letting each word carve its mark, not just into the case, but into the memory of the woman who once kissed my scraped knees and braided my hair. Tyler still said nothing. I glanced at him only once. His hands were clenched so tightly the knuckles blanched white, his jaw rigid, his gaze fixed downward. The judge called for a recess. Out in the corridor, I exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. My legs were unsteady, my throat raw, but I refused to let it show. Cameras, microphones, and a barrage of questions waited outside the courtroom doors. I didn't answer a single one. I just kept walking, one step at a time, one breath at a time. When the hearing resumed, I sensed a subtle shift in the air. The weight of the evidence, the inconsistencies in their testimony, it was starting to register. I even caught a flicker of unease in the judge's eyes. But nothing was certain yet. We were still in the middle of the fight. The real turning point hadn't arrived. And Tyler was still the question mark. Would he speak? Would he stay silent? Or would he, in the end, find the courage to choose the truth? I didn't know. But I was ready for either outcome. When I think of Tyler, I don't see the man sitting in that courtroom, stone-faced and still. I see the boy he used to be, the one with oversized glasses, dog-eared books, and a voice so soft it barely reached above a whisper. He was nothing like Ryan or me. While Ryan chased approval and control, and I chased freedom and distance, Tyler hid in the quiet corners, observing. He never demanded anything. Never competed. Never raised his voice. Maybe that's why I always felt closer to him, even when life pulled us apart. When we were kids, I was his shield. I remember the nights he'd creep into my room after our parents had another screaming match with Ryan. He'd clutch a worn stuffed animal, eyes wide with confusion. He didn't need words, just the comfort of being seen, the safety of silence. But as we grew older, Tyler faded into the background. He played the role perfectly, the agreeable son, the neutral party. He never confronted our parents, never challenged Ryan, never took a side. I often wondered if he even knew who he was beneath all that obedience. So in that courtroom, I couldn't read him. He was as still as a statue. And I had to wonder, was he still the boy I remembered, or had he finally chosen comfort over conscience? The answer had begun to take shape long before the trial. 2 weeks earlier, on a cold gray afternoon, I had been sitting on the back porch of the Carmel Bay house when Tyler appeared, without warning. He stood awkwardly at the edge of the wooden steps, hands jammed into his coat pockets, eyes fixed on the horizon. We didn't speak for a long time. Then quietly he said, "I'm sorry." I studied him and saw how worn down he looked. Years of being pulled in every direction had left their mark. "Why are you here, Tyler?" I asked, my voice almost carried away by the wind. He hesitated. I never wanted it to go this far. I thought they'd stop. I swallowed hard. They won't stop. You know that. He nodded slowly. Then from his pocket, he pulled out a small flash drive. No explanation, just the quiet offering of something fragile, something dangerous. "What is it?" I asked, My pulse already quickening. Emails, he said. Financial records. I found them months ago. His voice cracked. I should have told you sooner. I took the drive from his trembling hand. It felt heavier than any weapon I'd ever carried. Why now? I whispered. His eyes glistened as he looked away. Because you're the only one who ever stood up for me. Even when we were kids. Even when you didn't have to. I can't keep pretending. I can't be part of this. The wind carried only the crash of the ocean for a moment. And I saw, maybe for the first time, the man Tyler could have been all along, the one buried under years of fear and misplaced loyalty. I wanted to tell him he didn't owe me anything. But the truth was, his decision changed everything. In the courtroom, watching him sit so still, I knew the war inside him wasn't over. He was caught between two worlds, the family that raised him and the truth he'd finally chosen to protect. That's the thing about betrayal, it doesn't cut in just one direction. Tyler had betrayed Ryan and my mother by handing me the key to their downfall. But Tyler had also betrayed the version of himself that had survived by staying silent. And I understood that better than anyone. The night after he handed me the flash drive, I didn't sleep. I went through every file, every document, every email. What I found was devastating, an undeniable timeline of manipulation, sham charities, and forged amendments to my father's will. But more than that, it revealed something no court could ignore: intent. This wasn't carelessness. It was a calculated conspiracy. Tyler had been carrying those files for months. I could imagine the nights he lay awake, the weight of those secrets pressing against his chest. I knew what it cost him to give them to me. By choosing my side, he was losing theirs, and maybe losing them forever. So in the courtroom, when he sat there silent, I didn't push him. I didn't ask him to testify. I didn't demand that he speak out. I let him keep his quiet, because sometimes courage isn't about shouting. Sometimes it's about doing the right thing in silence. His internal battle wasn't over. But his choice was made. Now it was my turn to finish what he had started. There's something chilling about watching people you once loved become strangers, and worse, become your enemies. As the trial dragged on, Ryan's tactics turned darker, more desperate. He didn't just want to win, he wanted to break me entirely. If that meant destroying my reputation, my dignity, my sanity, he was more than willing. The first hit came through the press. Local papers and blogs started publishing carefully worded headlines, questions raised over decorated veteran's service record. Family feud over million-dollar estate intensifies. At first, I ignored them, hoping they'd fade. They didn't. They multiplied. Anonymous sources fed the fire, twisting half-truths into a public execution of my character. The words they used clung to me: emotionally unstable, estranged from family for decades, possible falsification of military service. Every phrase chipped away at the truth I had spent my life living. It was Ryan's signature move: smear first, deny later. Soon, old photos of me in uniform were circulating online, picked apart by armchair critics. Some claimed my medals were fake. Others questioned the authenticity of my deployments. Total strangers dissected a life they couldn't possibly understand. And Ryan didn't stop at gossip. He had money, influence, and he used both. Suddenly, forged documents appeared: a fake letter from a commanding officer casting doubt on my service record, a falsified medical report suggesting I'd never been injured overseas, even a fabricated psychological evaluation claiming I suffered from delusions. I sat with my legal team, combing through each piece of so-called evidence, my stomach twisting with every forged signature, every digital manipulation, every deliberate twist of fact. It was like watching my life be erased in real time. But the worst part wasn't in the newspapers, it was in my family. Ryan had always been my mother's favorite, but now he weaponized that bond with precision. I overheard whispers about what he told her behind closed doors: that I was dangerous, unstable, that I had come home not to grieve my father but to steal what wasn't mine. I saw the effect in her eyes when she passed me in the courthouse hallway, cold, distant, stripped of even the smallest trace of maternal warmth. She didn't speak. She didn't look directly at me. It was as though she had already erased me from her life, not with legal papers, but by choice. There's a particular kind of heartbreak that comes when your own mother believes the worst about you, not because she has proof, but because it's easier. Easier to accept Ryan's version of events than to face the possibility that her golden child was capable of deceit. I wrestled with the bitterness. At night, I'd lie awake replaying every moment of my childhood, every Christmas morning, every scraped knee she bandaged, every lullaby she hummed, searching for signs that this day might come. Looking for clues I had missed that one day she'd stand silent while her son tried to destroy her daughter. And then there was Tyler. He became the still point in the chaos, not openly against me, but not fully on their side. He drifted through conversations, face unreadable, his posture caught between guilt and resolve. I knew he carried the weight of what he'd given me. I knew it was tearing him apart. Ryan noticed it too. I saw the way he leaned in during recesses, whispering to Tyler with that rehearsed, disarming smile. I noticed the hand on his shoulder, the nods, the calculated attempts to pull him back. It was the old family script, loyalty above truth, appearances above integrity. It made my skin crawl. But I didn't interfere. Tyler's choice had to be his own. If I pushed, I risked snapping the last fragile thread of honesty that still existed between us. In the rare quiet moments between testimonies, our eyes would meet across the room. His face gave nothing away, but I recognized the fracture. The slow, inevitable breaking of someone forced to choose between the family that raised him, and the truth that could set him free. And still, I stayed on my feet. I kept my silence not because I lacked fight, but because I understood that some battles aren't won by shouting, they're won by holding your ground until the lies collapse under their own weight. Ryan had hurled everything he had at me, the press, the forged documents, the family loyalty he twisted into a weapon. And yet here I was, bruised but unbroken, alone but not defeated. I knew with absolute certainty that the closer we came to the verdict, the more desperate he would become. The war wasn't over, but the tide was starting to shift. The night before the final hearing, I sat in the Carmel Bay house, watching waves hammer the rocks below. The salt in the air mixed with the pull of memory. My hands rested on the old wooden table where my father once traced maps for me, maps of places I would one day see wearing the uniform. This house wasn't just an inheritance, it was the last untouched piece of the person I had been before the world, before the family, before the war. I had made my choice long ago. I wasn't going to bend. I wasn't going to bargain. No matter what Ryan tried, no matter the lies, the twisted histories, I would stand. Even if it meant standing alone. But deep down, I knew I wasn't the only one undecided. Tyler had become the quiet heart of this storm. He held the key, the truth locked in that flash drive, but he had yet to speak a single word in court. I'd stopped expecting him to. I told myself I'd respect whatever decision he made. But a small, fragile part of me, the part that still believed in family, waited, silently and painfully. Just after midnight, a knock came at the door. Tyler stood there in the porch light, drenched from the mist, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. For a long moment, we simply looked at each other. Then he exhaled sharp, shaky, and said, "I can't sleep." I stepped aside. "Come in." He sat in the living room, the same space where we once built blanket forts as kids. His eyes wandered over the framed photographs on the mantel, our family in brighter days, my father's laugh frozen behind glass. "I hate him," Tyler whispered. "I hate what he's done. But, she's still our mother." I lowered myself into the armchair across from him. "I know." He swallowed hard. "If I testify, she'll never forgive me." I let the silence stretch between us, heavy but honest. Finally, I said, "Sometimes doing the right thing costs you everything. But it's not about what you lose, it's about what you can live with when it's over." His eyes found mine, filling with something I hadn't seen in years, raw, human fear. "I don't want to lose you too." The words cut through me sharper than any accusation ever had. "You won't lose me," I said quietly. "Not if you choose the truth." He didn't move for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "I'll speak." I exhaled, not relief, not victory, just release. The knowledge that the choice was his, and he had made it. The next morning, the courtroom felt different. The tension was still there, the faces still drawn, but something had shifted. Ryan tapped his pen against the table, restless. My mother sat rigid, her expression carved in ice. When Tyler's name was called, the room seemed to inhale all at once. He rose, hands trembling slightly, and took the oath. I watched him walk up, this man who had spent his life avoiding conflict, now stepping straight into the fire. His voice started soft, but with each word, it strengthened. He spoke of the emails, the suspicious transactions, the forged documents. He said he had seen it all. And he named names: Ryan, our mother. Piece by piece, he laid their actions bare until the room fell into stunned silence. I felt heat sting the corners of my eyes, but I didn't look away. When he finished, Tyler didn't glance at Ryan. He looked at me. And in that look, all the years of distance, all the unspoken things, all the shared childhood moments, mended, if only slightly. Ryan's jaw tightened, rage flickering beneath the surface. My mother's eyes glistened, her mask slipping. But it no longer mattered. The truth was out, and the line had been drawn. As Tyler passed my chair, he paused. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. I hadn't been standing alone after all. And now, with the truth unleashed, I knew, this was the moment the tide truly turned. The final morning arrived with a stillness that only comes after surviving storms. I sat at the plaintiff's table, fingers brushing the edges of the tan folder resting beside me, the same folder that held every lie, every betrayal, every secret they thought would stay buried. Across the room, I could feel Ryan's gaze, sharp, predatory. My mother sat beside him, her face carved into something harder than stone. And behind them Tyler, hands folded, still, but no longer silent. The judge called the court to order. One sharp strike of the gavel echoed through the room. My attorney rose first, delivering our closing argument with calm precision. Every word landed like a stone placed carefully into an unbreakable wall. Then came the pivot. "Your Honor," she said, voice steady, "the defense has questioned my client's integrity from the start. Today we submit definitive evidence, not only disproving their claims, but revealing an extensive pattern of fraud committed by the plaintiffs themselves." She glanced at me. I stood, folder in hand. My steps toward the bench felt heavier than usual, not from fear, but from the weight of what I carried. For just a second, I caught Tyler's eyes. He gave the smallest nod. I placed the folder before the judge. From there, everything moved in surreal slow motion. The judge adjusted his glasses, turned the first page, and the quiet sound of paper sliding beneath his fingers filled the room. His brow knit, his eyes darkened, and when he spoke, his voice was low but cutting. "No one move. Close the doors." The gasp was immediate. Chairs scraped. Before anyone could process what was happening, 2 uniformed military police officers stepped in through the side doors, faces impassive, movements crisp. I stayed seated, calm. The judge's voice rose just enough to fill the chamber. "This court is now in possession of evidence suggesting criminal fraud involving federal military benefits, forged legal documents, and obstruction of justice." Ryan's complexion drained to a ghostly white. His mouth opened, but no sound followed. His lawyer, confident only hours before, fumbled and dropped every paper in his hands. Sheets scattered to the floor like brittle leaves in the wind. My mother sat rigid, lips trembling, her eyes wide, not on me, but on the judge, as the reality began to settle. The MPs positioned themselves at both exits. One stepped forward to receive instructions. The judge passed him the folder, without hesitation. The silence that followed was unbearable, and beautiful. I walked back to my seat without looking at Ryan or my mother. My hands folded in my lap, my eyes forward. The air was heavy, but inside me there was only stillness. I had delivered the truth. It was alive now, undeniable, irreversible. The judge called a short recess to review the evidence. The clerk and bailiffs moved quickly, urgency etched across their faces. Ryan shifted, perhaps to speak to his attorney, but the MPs motioned for him to stay seated. Panic bled across his expression, the slow realization that the world he'd built on lies was beginning to crumble. I thought I'd feel triumph, or rage, or relief. But what settled in my chest was peace. Not because I had won, not yet, but because I had done exactly what I came to do. I had stood my ground. Tyler didn't smile, but his eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. His choice, his courage, was written there. When the judge returned, his words were clear: the evidence warranted immediate federal investigation. The civil case would be suspended pending criminal inquiries. Ryan slumped. My mother's composure cracked, her hands shook. I remained upright. The gavel struck. The session was over. The war wasn't entirely finished, but this battle was mine. I stood breathing deeply, freely, for the first time in years. The truth had landed like a bomb, and I was still here. The thing about truth is, it doesn't always explode in shouts. Sometimes it moves like a scalpel, precise, methodical. That morning, as the MPs kept the doors sealed and the judge held the folder in his hands, I knew the unraveling had begun. That folder wasn't just paper and ink, it was a blueprint of deceit. Every page, another tile in the mosaic of fraud Ryan and my mother had built together, and every piece now stood in the open. Every forged signature, every manipulated bank transfer, every legal maneuver twisted to their advantage, it was all laid out in black and white. The judge's tone remained even, but there was a subtle shift beneath it. This was no longer a civil dispute. This was the beginning of criminal exposure. The first blow came with the financial records. Funds supposedly earmarked for veterans' charities Ryan had publicly claimed to support in my name, had been siphoned into private accounts. Accounts directly tied to both him and my mother. It wasn't just greed. It wasn't just embezzlement. It was the exploitation of my military service, the very core of who I was, weaponized for profit. I watched the color drain from Ryan's face. His lawyer shuffled through papers that no longer mattered. Lies he had spent years perfecting were unraveling in real time. Then came the second revelation, the forensic analysis of my father's will. Amendments filed only weeks before his death carried signatures that didn't match the originals. The ink was fresh, the phrasing legal but rushed, rife with manipulation. The so-called amendments had been drafted not by my father's longtime attorney, but by a lawyer on Ryan's payroll. The judge read from the findings without emotion, but each word landed like a hammer: forgery, document tampering, potential conspiracy to defraud. My mother flinched. For the first time, her mask cracked. Her hands shook, her eyes darting around the room, desperate for something, or someone to steady her. But Ryan kept staring forward, jaw clenched tight, as if pure stubbornness could hold back the collapse. And then the final thread, the emails. They were the spine of the case, long chains of messages between Ryan and my mother, plotting to contest the will, to discredit my service, to erase me not only from the inheritance, but from the family itself. In them, they spoke casually about my weakness. About how no one will believe her, because no one ever has. The words hit colder than any winter I've known. But in that cold, there was a flicker of warmth. Tyler. Now seated on the witness bench, his hands folded, his voice quiet but steady, he confirmed the emails were real. He explained how he had found them by accident, how he wrestled with the decision to come forward. He admitted his fear, his shame, his hesitation. But he came anyway. He chose. For that, I would be grateful for the rest of my life. I didn't look at Ryan, I didn't need to. His fury was radiating across the room. His plan, years in the making, was dissolving in front of him. My mother stayed silent. No tears. No protests. Just the stillness of someone watching her world crumble piece by piece. The ruling was swift. The civil claims against me, dismissed entirely. The Carmel Bay house, confirmed as mine. And beyond that, the judge ordered an immediate federal investigation into Ryan and my mother for fraud, forgery, and misuse of charitable funds. A wave of whispers rolled through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously. Attorneys exchanged hushed words. I remained still, not out of coldness or gloating, but because something deeper had settled in me. A quiet certainty. The truth was out. The lies were dead. As the judge adjourned, I rose slowly, gathering my things. Tyler approached, hesitant. He didn't speak at first, just stood with his eyes downcast. "Thank you," I whispered. He swallowed, nodded. "I should have done it sooner." "You did it when it mattered," I told him. Ryan was still in his seat, unmoving, his lawyer leaning in to whisper in his ear. My mother sat beside him, her fingers twisting together, her face pale and far away. Neither of them looked at me. Not once. When I stepped outside, the sunlight felt too bright, almost foreign. But the weight on my chest was lighter than it had been in years. The fight wasn't over, there would be more hearings, more legal battles, but the part where they controlled my story, my name, my life was over. The truth was no longer buried. And for the first time in years, I felt free. It's strange, the moment when everything breaks. You imagine it will be loud, shouting, slamming fists, chaos. But when Ryan finally unraveled in the middle of the courtroom, it came first with silence. The gavel's echo still hung in the air when he stood, unsteady, the arrogance he'd worn like armor stripped away. His lawyer tugged at his sleeve, whispering urgently, but he barely seemed to hear. His eyes darted around the room, searching for something he would never find. I stayed seated, my hands resting lightly on the polished wood before me, my breathing even. From the outside, I must have looked calm, composed. Victorious, even. On the outside, I looked composed. On the inside, something else entirely was happening. Ryan's voice cracked when he finally spoke. "This is wrong," he muttered. "She's lying." "She's always been the word stumbled, then dissolved into silence. I didn't meet his outburst with anger. Not even with satisfaction. What I felt was heavier, sorrow. The man sitting there wasn't the brother I remembered. Not the one who used to carry me on his shoulders at the county fair, or teach me how to skip stones across the bay. That boy had long since disappeared, replaced by ambition, greed, and something colder I couldn't reach. He sank into his seat, hands trembling. Beside him, our mother sat frozen, eyes glassy, face unreadable. For the first time in my life, I wondered, was she finally seeing the truth, or was she still clinging to the fantasy they had built together? Then Tyler stood. Slow, hesitant. His shoulders shook, his head lowered, his hands wiping at his eyes. I had never seen him cry, not even as a child when bruises and heartbreak were easier to come by. But now he wept, and something inside me cracked. I rose quietly, meeting him halfway across the floor without knowing why, just following instinct. I placed a hand on his shoulder. He covered his face, trembling, the weight of his choice, and the wreckage it caused, etched into every line of his body. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice breaking. I shook my head. "You have nothing to be sorry for." His red, swollen eyes lifted to mine. "No," I said softly. "They broke themselves. You just stopped pretending not to see it." Around us, the bailiffs moved quietly, speaking with Ryan's legal team, escorting my mother to a side room as the paperwork for the criminal investigation began. But none of it mattered in that moment. Not to me. Not to Tyler. We stood there, two survivors of the same wreckage. Both of us carrying different wounds, but finding each other in the aftermath. It hit me then, I didn't hate Ryan. I didn't even hate my mother. What I felt was grief. Grief for the family we could have been. For the years that would never come back. For the fragile hopes I'd held onto far too long. Tyler exhaled sharply, straightening, wiping his face one last time before nodding and returning to his seat. Quieter now. Changed. I took my place again, calm, steady, but with a heart heavier than I'd thought possible. The judge finalized the proceedings. Dismissal of all claims. Initiation of criminal charges. Restoration of my property rights. All of it important. All of it necessary. But none of it mattered the way people might think. What mattered was that I had stood my ground without losing myself. That I had spoken the truth without lowering myself to the cruelty they had used against me. And that Tyler had found his voice. The courtroom slowly emptied. Reporters murmured outside. Cameras clicked from the courthouse steps. Questions were shouted, none of which I would ever answer. When I stepped through the heavy wooden doors, sunlight poured over me, too bright after the dim light of the courtroom. I didn't look back. Some chapters don't need revisiting. Some endings write themselves not in fire or fury, but in quiet, steady resilience. My heart still ached. It always would. But I knew this, I was standing, and I was free. I once believed that when the truth came out, everything would fall neatly into place. That justice would stitch together what had been torn. I was wrong. The days after the collapse in court were quieter than I expected, eerily so. Ryan vanished from public view. My mother, too, retreated into silence, her calls unanswered, her name unspoken. The Parker family name, once printed on hotel banners and charity gala programs, became a ghost. But it wasn't the public silence that haunted me. It was Tyler. He existed somewhere in the in-between, not fully at my side, but not bound to them either. When he visited the house one afternoon, I saw the weight on him before he spoke. Hands buried in his coat pockets, shoulders hunched, he stood like someone carrying something too heavy to name. "They won't speak to me," he said quietly, barely above a whisper. Not even Mom. I poured him tea. I didn't know what else to do, he continued. They say I betrayed them. That I destroyed the family. I keep thinking, maybe I did. I set the cup down, meeting his eyes. You didn't destroy anything, Tyler. They did that themselves. But I knew words wouldn't wash away his guilt. It was written in the lines of his face, in the heaviness of his movements. He had chosen the truth, and the cost of that choice was steep. Some would call Tyler brave. Others would call him weak for waiting so long to step forward. I knew the whispers were already out there, in online threads, in hushed conversations, in the sidelong looks we caught in town. Was he truly innocent? Or had he only changed sides once it was safe to do so? We never said it aloud, but the question hung between us. And while I never doubted his heart, I couldn't deny the complexity of his choice, or the years he had stayed silent. I didn't press him for answers. I didn't demand a justification. Because I understood something most people never would: survival in a family like ours often meant silence. And breaking that silence required not just courage, but sacrifice. As the sun sank over the cliffs, we sat together without speaking. No forgiveness offered. None asked for. Just two people trying to make sense of the pieces left behind. And somehow, that had to be enough. I had thought the hardest part would be the fight itself, the trial, the lies, the public humiliation. But I was wrong. The hardest part came after, when the dust had settled and the shouting was gone, leaving only the hollow ache of what had been lost. I spent hours walking the shoreline behind the Carmel Bay house, tracing the water's edge the way I had as a child. The waves still rolled in endlessly, but now they carried the quiet weight of memory. I thought of my father, how much he had loved this place, how he had believed, perhaps too naively, that the family he built could hold together after he was gone. I wondered what he would think if he saw us now, fractured, divided, hollowed out by greed. I thought of my mother, her eyes locking on mine in court, her voice steady as she stood against me. I had spent so many years chasing her approval, her warmth, her pride. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped asking for it. And Ryan, the brother I once admired, then feared, then finally pitied. I didn't hate him anymore. Hate is heavy. It corrodes from the inside out. And after carrying it for so many years, I was done. I learned that letting go isn't weakness, it's survival. I couldn't change what had been done, and I couldn't force apologies that would never come. But I could choose what to carry forward. So I chose this, I chose to forgive. Not because they deserved it, but because I did. I chose to stop chasing what had never been mine, their love, their validation, their acceptance. I chose to stand alone, if that's what it meant to finally be free. As the tide receded toward the horizon, something shifted inside me. It wasn't joy, and it wasn't relief. It was steadier, a quiet resolve, the kind that comes after walking through fire and realizing you are still whole. Not untouched, but whole. And sometimes, that is enough. The public has a short memory. For weeks after the trial, my name was everywhere: local news, podcasts, gossip sites. Hero veteran wins case. Family feud explodes in court. Truth or manipulation? The praise, the doubt, the outrage, it all swung back and forth like a pendulum. But none of it mattered anymore. I wasn't the villain Ryan tried to create. I wasn't the hero the headlines wanted, either. I was something far messier, far more human, a woman who had made mistakes, carried scars both seen and unseen, and fought for something that could never be fully restored. My military record was cleared. The false accusations withdrawn. A few people who had turned away offered quiet apologies. But the deeper damage, the kind that cuts through trust, would never fully heal. I wasn't angry about it. I had simply outgrown it. Months later, I attended one public event, a veterans' charity gala. The applause was polite, the handshakes warm, but I still felt the undercurrent of curiosity, of unease, as if no one knew quite what to make of me. And that was fine, because I wasn't there for them. I was there for those who would never get to tell their stories. For the ones who came home in pieces, physically, emotionally, and whose truths would never make headlines. I was there for me. The Carmel Bay house became my sanctuary. I restored the garden my father once tended. I volunteered quietly at a local outreach center for veterans. I stopped checking the news. I stopped explaining myself. I no longer lived as a symbol or a cautionary tale. I lived as a woman who had finally claimed the right to define herself. That was the victory no one could take from me. And in the end, when the headlines faded and the legal battles became background noise, I came home, not to a family, not to applause, but to the one place that had never betrayed me. The house by the sea, my anchor. The Carmel Bay house stood exactly as I remembered, weathered wood, salt-streaked windows. The garden was wild but still alive, breathing beneath years of neglect. That first morning, I moved through it in silence, fingertips trailing across old furniture, listening to the wind carry memories through half-open doors. I didn't rush to fill the space. I let it stay bare, honest. I began tending the garden again, slowly and patiently. Hands in the soil, knees pressed to the earth, I found something I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Stillness. The kind that doesn't demand answers. The kind that lets you simply exist. I filled notebooks with stories I'd carried for decades, some from faraway battlefields, others from quiet afternoons of my childhood. I didn't write to publish. I wrote for the woman I had become, and for the girl I had once been. Tyler visited sometimes. Never for long, and rarely with many words. But we'd sit on the porch with coffee, watching the sun dissolve into the water, sky bleeding gold and violet. We didn't talk about the trial, the family, or what we'd lost. We talked about music, books, and the small things that feel like everything when the world finally slows down. I forgave him in silence, not with speeches, but with presence. And in his own quiet way, he forgave me too, for the years we both let slip away. I learned to live without the constant noise of the past. Healing didn't arrive all at once, it crept in soft, hesitant, like sunlight through a cracked window. And I learned something else: survival was never the end of my story. For years, I'd believed that making it through the betrayals and the courtroom was the finish line. But endings aren't always sharp, sometimes they dissolve into beginnings so quiet you hardly notice them. I stopped counting the days since the verdict. I stopped measuring my life by what I'd lost. Instead, I planted roses. At first it felt almost trivial. But when the first buds appeared, soft pinks, deep reds, I found something tender in myself I thought had died years ago. It wasn't about the flowers. It was about nurturing something fragile and alive. I woke with the sunrise. I slept without nightmares. The weight on my chest didn't disappear, but it softened. Tyler kept coming by. The distance between us thinned, not through dramatic conversations, but through the simple act of showing up. He helped me mend a fence. He brought seeds for the garden. We sat for hours without speaking, and somehow, those silences healed more than words ever could. I didn't seek forgiveness from Ryan or my mother. I didn't ask for explanations I knew would never come. They became ghosts in my story, present, but no longer defining. For the first time, I wasn't anyone's disappointment. I wasn't anyone's scapegoat. I was just me. I found myself in the crash of waves, in the half-finished manuscripts on my desk, in the scent of lavender carried on the sea breeze. I wasn't the hero people wanted me to be. I wasn't the villain others painted. I was simply a woman who had survived, who refused to let bitterness take root, who, when given every reason to hate, chose instead to begin again. And for me, that was enough. If you've stayed with me this far, thank you, not just for listening, but for witnessing. For walking with me through the dark, through the fire, and into the quiet after. This isn't a story about victory in the way most imagine it. It's not about proving something to the world. It's about reclaiming what was mine from the start, my dignity, my name, my peace. It's about the slow, deliberate act of standing back up after you've been knocked down, again and again. It's about realizing that forgiveness isn't always something you give to others. Sometimes, it's something you give to yourself. We live in a world quick to judge, quick to abandon, quick to turn pain into spectacle. I know that better than most. But I also know this: there is power in telling the truth. Power in surviving. And an even greater power in choosing to begin again without hatred, without bitterness, without the need for revenge. I don't know what battles you're fighting, or what wounds you carry. But I know this: you're still here. And sometimes, that's the bravest thing of all. If this story touched something in you, carry it forward. Share it. Hold space for those who need to hear that broken does not mean defeated.